Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight on this Monday, December 15th, 2014. We're going to be joining Paul Joseph Watson in the UK, or rather he's going to be joining us. We're going to talk about what's going on in Sydney. We're now starting to get a little bit of information. I was just told that they're now saying that 2 hostages have died, as well as the man who had taken them hostage. How is that going to be used? What is that going to mean for Australia, for all of us? Is that going to be an example to take us to war in the Middle East so that we can shut down ISIS? Yet we see that this guy has no connections to ISIS or al-Nusra. Nevertheless, our former CIA Director Morrill says that the terrorist attack in the U.S. is guaranteed. He says ISIS has had a focus on Australia for some time, so by innuendo, they can make this connection. They can try to drive us to war. So we're going to talk to Paul Joseph Watson as to what's behind this and, of course, what's ahead of us in terms of this attack. How is it going to be used? Right now, in this segment, though, I wanted to take your calls. I wanted to go to Daryl in Kansas. We also had the story that broke last Friday that we talked about through the weekend about the Spokane, Washington officer, the sheriff's deputy, who was talking about his MRAP and how, when questioned why he needed this kind of capability, he said, well, we have all these constitutionalists in the area. Daryl in Kansas says that he called the Spokane, Washington Police Department. Daryl, what did they tell you?
I'm looking at their website right now, and it says they're hiring. Hello?
Yes, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it says they're hiring. I'm looking at their website. Yes, I did call, and the woman thought it was very laughable. I wish I would have recorded it to put it on the internet, but I asked her, why is that guy not like constitutionalist? Didn't he take an oath to uphold the Constitution? And she's all, I don't know what oath they take. I haven't been to any of the ceremonies. And
yeah, really. She
was very much like I was bothering and laughed. And I'd like to say you do a great job, Paul Joseph Watson. Love them. You guys.
Thank you. Well, you know, that's just it. They don't really pay any attention to what they pledge to. They don't pay any attention to the Constitution. They don't take it seriously enough to really look at what they're pledging to. But, of course, we have to take it seriously, and we have to understand that anything that the government does that is not in alignment with the Constitution is not legitimate, because that is the supreme law of the land. That is the king. These guys are merely stewards put in place to serve that higher principle, that law that is king. That was a principle that they established during the American Revolution. They said lex rex. In other words, the law is king. And if they don't understand that, and they don't. That is the heart of all of our issues. And I would broaden it out a little bit to this as well. I think the fundamental problem with so many Christians who don't understand Romans 13 is the same thing. They don't understand that when the government is not aligned under the principles of God, then that government is no longer legitimate. In the same way that when the police or various other aspects of the government are not aligned under the Constitution, they are no longer legitimate. That's the fundamental issue here. They're not operating as a legitimate government when they deny the ultimate authority that they have for governing. That's why they take an oath to the Constitution. Thank you so much, Daryl. Let's go to Michael in South Carolina. Michael?
Hi, David.
Oh, yes. I guess it's Michelle then, right? Huh?
Okay,
Go ahead.
I had my earplug in.
Go ahead.
No, my first real quick comment was I was born and raised in Spokane, and I've only been gone for about 5 years. And I'm really shocked that the police department has gone downhill so terribly in this sort of time, because the cops seriously weren't like that, 5, 10 years ago.
Oh, absolutely. We've seen a massive and rapid change. And where do you think that's coming from? That's coming from Washington. It's the way they're being trained. Just recently, as we're talking about what was going on in New Mexico, there was a fellow teaching at the police academy, the state police academy, and he says, I refuse to teach this shoot first curriculum. He's somebody who'd been teaching at the police academy for a long time. It's different. They're setting up different rules for the police, and we need to be very concerned about that. Stay with us. We're going to be right back with Paul Joseph Watson from the UK to talk about what happened in Sydney. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight on this Monday, December 15th, 2014. We're going to be going to Paul Joseph Watson in the UK. He's going to update us on the situation in Sydney, what's behind it, how they're going to use it. Before we go to him, though, I want to let you know this is the first time we've ever had a sale for X2, Survival Shield X2. It's our first sale. It's a big one, 17% off and free shipping. With shipping, you would have normally paid up to $38 a bottle. Now you can get it for just $24.99. This is a sale that's going to run through next Monday only, and you have another 2 days to order it to get it guaranteed Christmas delivery. That's at InfoWarsLife.com, Survival Shield X2, the next level of Survival Shield with a powerful 650 micrograms of iodine per single drop. Now, going to Paul. Paul, before we start talking about Sydney, I just wanted to let you know and get your comments on it. We've had an update to this story out of Washington, Spokane, where Mikhail is putting an update on his story. He actually did finally get a comment from the police department there, and they said they thought that for us to put this up and say that this officer had a problem with constitutionalists was a cheap shot that was taken out of context. So I would invite people to take a look at that video and see if you think it's out of context. The context was the lady asked this sheriff's deputy, after he was bragging about the capabilities of his new MRAP, why would you need that? And he goes into detail talking about how, well, we need it because of constitutionalists and these people who have a lot of ammunition. I don't see that that's taken out of context. I don't think that's a cheap shot. I think the cheap shot is coming out of Homeland Security and the FBI, demonizing anybody that might be political opposition to an authoritarian police state. Paul, what's your comment on that?
Well, I mean, exactly as you said, if you watch the clip, his comments, you know, they hang on themselves. This is clearly not out of context. Right. It is part of this underlying trend. I mean, I've written stories over the past few months about how they're purchasing these armored vehicles for, quote, war on veterans. That was one of the headlines that was used in a local news story about the issue. So there's definitely an issue with them militarizing not only against Occupy protesters. We know that was a justification for the purchase of the Bearcat armored tank in New Hampshire to use against both Occupy and so-called sovereign citizens. That came out in the public meetings. And as I said, many news reports saying that this is part of the war on veterans. They're saying that veterans are all mentally unstable, waiting to explode IEDs all over the country. And it's definitely an underlying trend. So it's not taken out of context whatsoever. It's in context with what we've seen for years out of the DHS, as he said.
Yeah, we see that in their training scenarios. We had that one training scenario that was put out there in South Carolina where I think they had the Tea Party aligning with Muslims, and they had to come in and put that down. I mean, it's just amazing the absurd scenarios that they're coming up with, but they're feeding these scenarios to the police, and obviously the police are buying it without question. To think that your enemy is somebody who is a constitutionalist when you're supposed to swear allegiance to the Constitution as the highest law in the land. And as we have just been talking about it to one of the callers who called in here, and he called the police department in Washington, and they essentially laughed at him about that when he asked why they would move against constitutionalists.
Exactly. I mean, I wrote an article probably about a year ago now where this was an academic paper written by a top military official. Just Google Tea Party insurrectionists InfoWars. And in that, they detailed a plot where Tea Party insurrectionists would take over the city, and they would have to use military force to repel them.
That's right.
So this is in their own academic documents. It's in their own training programs. It's out there for anybody to see, and it's definitely one of the factors behind this militarization of police.
It's not something that's new. Alex has had this in his documentaries a decade ago. But what we're seeing here is that it's now been taught long enough and broadly enough that we're actually seeing them confess to this, and we're seeing them act upon these this worldview that they've been taught. That's what's different about it in the last year or two.
Exactly. And again, look at media narratives, as we're going to talk about with this Sydney situation. The media pushes this notion that veterans are out there waiting to explode. They don't actually analyze the issues behind why veterans are getting PTSD in the first place, why they're committing suicide en masse. It's just, this is the threat, we need to deal with it, and it's to justify this armored buildup, which again is about them escalating a situation which the studies clearly show only causes more violence. So, I mean, across the board, I mean, watch the video for yourself. Those comments are pretty clear. They're not taken out of context.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned the Sydney thing. I wanted to get you to bring us up to speed as to what the latest developments are. What have you heard about what's going on with Sydney? And then let's talk after that about what's behind it. What have you heard in terms of, last I heard, it looked like they're now announcing that 2 hostages have been killed. Is that correct?
Yeah, but it was over as of a few hours ago. they're saying that 3 are dead, including the gunman. So that suggests 2 hostages, maybe a police officer died. It's not being confirmed yet. The siege is now over. What I found interesting was, and this is what I study every single day, is media narratives. Because in the past year or so, there seems to have been this shift in media narrative not to blame so-called lone wolf terror attacks on extremist Islamist ideology. You saw it in Canada recently with the Canadian Parliament attack, another attack in Canada when 2 Canadian soldiers were run over. You saw it with the New York incident where somebody attacked police officers with an axe. And you see it in this Sydney incident. In every single incident, there is clearly extremist Islamist political motivation, whether you believe these people are actually ISIS members or not. More likely they're just ISIS inspired. But this angle, even though it's clearly there, is now being kind of buried by the mainstream media. And I think that's mainly related to the fact that, you know, the growth of ISIS in the first place was almost entirely as a result of the US government destabilizing Syria, the US government's allies, Qatar, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, funding and arming ISIS to begin with. Now we have people from all over Europe, young men, flying over to Syria and Iraq to fight on behalf of ISIS. We have the so-called moderate rebels in Syria, which were never moderate to begin with, even when, you know, the CFR said back in 2012, let's basically support Al-Qaeda. We now see that the arms that we gave them are crossing over into ISIS hands. So when these actual organic attacks happen, ones that aren't provocateured by the authorities as they have been in the past, we're now kind of seeing the media bury the extremist political motivation behind them, because there's a sense that they need to distract from the fact that this is partially caused by blowback as a result of Western foreign policy. And we're seeing it again in what happened with the Sydney siege.
Except that on the other side, too, we have this article up by Kit Daniels where we've got a former CIA chief saying that ISIS is going to attack the U.S. soon. He says sometime over the next year or so, guaranteed. So, I mean, it looks like they're, at the same time, they want to be politically correct and they want to distance themselves from this monster that they've created. On the other hand, I think they're more than capable of using that to justify yet another new war abroad, don't you?
Yeah, that's definitely an issue. But what I've noticed is obviously immediately after 9/11, any kind of attack whatsoever, they would immediately jump on the Islamist angle, push the hysterics to grease the skids for war and military intervention. It seems they've flipped the opposite way. I mean, take this Sydney siege, for example. Now the media narrative, now that this has ended, is that basically this guy was a lone nut, a criminal, and that he was not politically motivated, that he was out on bail for being an accessory to murder, other charges related to sexual offences. And they're now steering the narrative as to that was his motivation behind taking these dozens of hostages. But if you actually followed the story from the beginning, what evidence came out during the siege was completely ignored by the media and in fact censored in some cases. There were videos made by the hostages inside the cafe in Sydney where they said, the hostage takers told us to tell the world this is an ISIS attack and that the media is covering up the fact that it's an ISIS attack. We also know that the hostage taker demanded an ISIS flag. We later saw a generic Islamic flag displayed in the cafe window. We had a Facebook post from one of the hostages who said, the man wants the world to know Australia is under attack by the Islamic State. Now, even if this guy is not a member of ISIS, which, you know, he almost certainly isn't, this is obviously inspired by ISIS. But the media has completely buried that. Some of them don't even mention the fact. They agreed not to broadcast any of this information at the time. And even after the siege is now over, YouTube and Facebook are still deleting all these videos where these hostages say, this guy says he's a member of ISIS and that this is an ISIS attack on Australia. But very quickly, in the aftermath, we saw the media take this route where they buried that narrative and began to focus almost entirely on him being a lone figure and that he was just a criminal motivated by his own personal problems. So this is a general trend that I've seen over the past year or so, and it relates to the fact that there are these individuals out there. We had reports on the southern border from police officials, respected officials, saying that ISIS was active on the southern border just across there in Mexico. The DHS vehemently denied that over and over again. So this ties into that general trend of them downplaying Islamist extremist ideology linked to these lone wolf attacks, because at the moment it doesn't fit their broader narrative.
I think that's the key. At the moment, it doesn't fit their broader narrative, because we saw back in 2013, they were doing everything they could to try to start a war with Syria and using these same people. And now, after they've gotten Muslims abroad, like this guy, who basically is, he could be a lone actor who is fired up about this, but clearly he is motivated by his Islamicist attitudes with the signs and the flags that he put up there. We're going to be right back with Paul Joseph Watson. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, your host today, and joining me from the UK is Paul Joseph Watson. And we've been talking about the attack in Sydney, what's behind it, how is it being spun. We're going to go back to Paul Joseph Watson, but we're going to also take your calls beginning the next segment if you would like to weigh in and tell us what you think is behind it. As Paul has pointed out, it's kind of strange that as they were trying to ramp up a war in Syria, yet these most recent lone wolf attacks, as they're being portrayed by the media has changed the narrative, not trying to tie these Islamicist attacks in Canada and Australia, not trying to tie those to a broader agenda just yet. But of course, we do see the CIA saying sometime this year we can expect to, guaranteed, we'll see some kind of an ISIS attack in America. Now, that number, if you want to call in, is 800-259-9231. That's 800-259-9231. Paul, going back to what you were talking about, I mean, it looks like they're deliberately trying to keep a lid on this, trying to make this about a single shooter. Do you think they're trying to keep everything quiet until they've got more neocons sworn in from the recent election? What do you think is behind all this?
I think they're doing it for a number of reasons. One of them is cultural sensitivity. I mean, there was a story which came out as this was developing, this viral hashtag campaign, I'll ride with you. There was a woman on a train or a bus in Sydney or in Australia who took off her hijab headscarf because she feared some kind of retribution from other Australians who would verbally or physically abuse her because of what was taking place in this cafe in Sydney. There were no actual reports of violence directed against Muslims as a result of this. So one of the other commuters said, I'll walk with you, and it turned into this huge international hashtag campaign. And, you know, as one person tweeted, who I retweeted, it cynically shifts the narrative of the Sydney siege away from violent Muslims by casting non-Muslims as the real danger. And that went on to completely dominate the narrative. And then you had the Sydney Morning Herald coming out and even suggesting that Australians should have, quote, empathy for the terrorist. They said, how should we feel for the perpetrator and his family? So there was this kind of odd cultural sensitivity going on, not so much sympathy focused on the actual hostages being terrorized inside the cafe, but a kind of deflection to blame Australians for Islamophobia that wasn't actually taking place. So that was another weird little element to this.
Yeah, I know there's been a lot of complaints in Australia. They had people were concerned and angry about the fact that Muslim women can wear a hijab in public, but nobody else can cover their face. They even had some protesters show up to the Capitol there. I think one of them was wearing a Ku Klux Klan hood and they made him take it off, and underneath it he had a Muslim hijab on it. You know, so it's like, that's fine. I think maybe we ought all be able to wear masks if we want to with the surveillance state, but to let one group have it and not to let others have it, that was the issue. I think that was a sticking point. But yeah, it is very much a political correctness that's going on, isn't it?
Yeah, and it reminds me of that story last week where the cop in Tennessee pulled over Saudi Arabians who's they had paper tags on their car. They said they had a dead baby in the trunk of the car, and he basically let them go. No questions asked. They were on their way because of cultural sensitivity.
I never tried that when I got pulled over by the cops. I'm sorry. I said I'd never tried that when I got pulled over the cops, but I guess it wouldn't work for me.
Yeah, and he was he was praised by the police chief and this Islamic scholar that they consulted for the story, when obviously it doesn't matter what cultural sensitivity is in the background. It's a potential crime. You need to check it out. Police officers smell weed in somebody's car, they send them to jail. We've heard stories about that over and over again. So there is that element to it. I mean, the FBI crime stats, which have just come out for last year, are interesting because they show that Jews in America are 4 times more likely to be the victims of hate crimes than Muslims, and those crimes are less likely to be investigated. That's not neocon Zionist propaganda. It's FBI crime statistics. So it suggests that this Islamophobia thing, again, is being whipped up and generated by certain elements of the media for their own agenda, and it's not actually a major problem in the West. But in the immediate aftermath of this Sydney siege, the main concern amongst many Australians, and this was the top trending hashtag on Twitter above anything else, was that Muslims on public transport might get some retribution. There was a sporadic report about some verbal abuse, but nothing really whatsoever, and that became the main focus of the whole story.
And yet, what really happened here is, we got to go to a break, but what really happened here is that you had the Australian government, for whatever reason, failed to protect the people from a guy who was clearly violent and crazy with his long rap sheet. We're going to be right back with Paul Joseph Watson, and we'll take your calls and comments. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, and we have Paul Joseph Watson joining us from the UK. We're going to be going back to your phone calls. Before we do, I want to let you know that we have the first sale ever of Survival Shield X2. It's the first time it's ever been on sale, and it's a great sale. We've got it for 17% off plus free shipping. Typically, with shipping, you would have paid up to $38. Now you can get it for just $24.99. This is a sale that's only going to run through next Monday. You have 2 days left if you want to get guaranteed Christmas delivery. Again, the sale will run for just 1 week. And, of course, that's our Survival Shield X2. It's 50% stronger than the original Survival Shield formulation. Paul, let's take some calls. Let's go to Slim in Canada. Slim, you had a comment about ISIS. Go ahead. Oh, he has. Okay, he's dropped off. Let's go to Kevin in West Virginia. Go ahead, Kevin.
Hey, Mr. Knight, and hey, Mr. Watson. I had a comment about torture and some comments about the police state here in West Virginia. My first comment about torture is 2 wrongs don't make a right, but I guess under this establishment and under Common Core that 2 wrongs do make a right. And about the police state in West Virginia, I called the West Virginia State Police and the Martinsburg City Police, which is in Berkeley County in the eastern panhandle of West Virginia. When I called the State Police of West Virginia and asked them about the MRAB vehicles, the lady on the line told me that it was for finding marijuana in the woods of West Virginia. And of course, I had to laugh and was like, "Come on, lady, this is absolutely absurd." And when I called the Martinsburg City Police, I asked them the same question. At first, I asked to speak to a public information officer, and they didn't know what that was, but finally was able to talk to somebody. And the guy told me, the officer that came on the line told me that it was none of my business how they get their tactical gear and how they apply their tactical gear, and that if I call back again, that I would be subject to arrest. And they also said, "Mr. Ballum, if we see you in Martinsburg, you might want to be careful." I'm like, wow, that blew my mind that they would tell me that.
Yeah, it's none of your business because they don't work for you, because they don't care about the Constitution, evidently, based on this person's comments in Washington. And as Paul pointed out, we've seen this over and over and over again. Going back to 2009, if you want the MIAC report that came out of the Fusion Center. But even before that, Alex Jones was doing documentaries back in the late 90s talking about the police state, how that was being encouraged. But, of course, it has accelerated, it's gotten deeper, it's gotten broader, and it's all coming out of Washington. Paul, you wanted to comment on that?
Yeah, I just find it funny, the notion that smoking marijuana would make somebody more likely to be violent, requiring an armored vehicle response. If you've ever been around people who smoke marijuana, and it's the reason I don't smoke it, is because it turns them into sedated zombies. Alcohol makes people more violent, but obviously they can't use that as a justification, so it's just bizarre.
And along those lines, Paul, there was a story out today I had in my stack here from truththeory.com. They point out that marijuana decreases death rates from painkillers by over 30%. It's very, very effective in terms of people who are under a great deal of pain for cancer. And they point out that it allows people to avoid these very dangerous prescription drugs that not only kill people, but basically affect you psychologically to make it so that you kill other people. Typically all of these shooters that we've seen have been involved in one way or the other with pharmaceutical drugs that affect your mental state in a very adverse way, make you very violent, very paranoid. And as you point out, Paul, marijuana does not do that at all. Instead, it allows people to avoid these dangerous drugs. But we still see a huge pushback in terms of even allowing people to have it for medical uses. That, I think, is the saddest thing. I mean, it's, recreational stuff, prohibition doesn't work. We've proven that with alcohol, but we know that there's a lot of beneficial uses for marijuana, for medical patients, for glaucoma, for increasing the appetite of people who are suffering from cancer and chemotherapy, HIV treatment. We understand that. It's not a question. Why wouldn't we allow people to have access to that? I think it's one of the most insane things about our society.
Yeah, and from the financial perspective, I mean, look what it's done for the economy of Colorado. There are only benefits all around, so it makes no sense to continue that policy. And I think gradually now that's being overturned, which is the good news.
But of course, we go the other way, and we also say that hemp, even though it has absolutely no hallucinogens, hemp is also banned. And so we can't have hemp for substitutions for cotton and that sort of thing. And of course, that's the issue. It's a competition to people who have vested interests in Washington. So that's a large part of why hemp as well is banned. Let's go to Bill in Oklahoma. Bill, go ahead. Okay, let's go to John in Washington. Go ahead, John.
Hello, guys. This is a fellow who lived in Spokane, Washington. I am personally acquainted with Paul. Paul, you'll know who I am after you listen for a second. But I operated a large informational website in Spokane, and I lived there, and it got so bad with surveillance and harassment that I moved to a neighboring county. I live about 14 miles off the paved road, and twice out here in recent history, I have seen bearcats on the dirt road right at sundown patrolling, and they were not the same model. They were two different ones. So Spokane has a multi-jurisdictional terrorism task force headed up by Darren DeRue, and his wife is the public relations officer for the city of Spokane Police Department, and Aussie Knezovich is the sheriff there. I've seen him numerous times stand on the stage with Sheriff Mack at the Liberty and Freedom rallies that we have here occasionally, which, by the way, the audience is completely full of feds when we have those, and stand up there and ballyhoo the Constitution. Yet he'll line up for all of this bootlick, and he'll do exactly anything that the federal police tell him to do, and I can tell you for a fact, I was in an adjacent county minding my own business, 10:45 one night in the year 2005, and on a telephone call from Spokane County to Stevens County, the Stevens County sheriff, who was Craig Thayer, picked me up at my home, transported me across county lines, turned me over to the Spokane County Sheriff's Department, who gulagged me for over a week without getting to see a magistrate, with absolutely no telephone call whatsoever. I lost $36,000 in construction contracts because of it, and nobody knew where I was, and my dogs were locked in the house with no food. So I can tell you for a fact that Spokane County not only handles Spokane County like a commissar, they actually dictate to Stevens County, Pend Oreille County, Ferry County, all of the adjacent counties, Lincoln County, whatever Spokane says, they will do it.
And that's very interesting, John, because of the comments that we finally got from the Spokane Police Department, where they said that those comments were taken out of context and that it was essentially a cheap shot. No, really, you can look at that clip, go to the article that we got up on Infowars.com. You can see the short clip for yourself. You can see that it's not out of context. We should play that again, guys. You can see that that clip is not out of context. And, of course, the bigger context is that this is going on across the country, and it's coming out of Washington through the FBI, through Homeland Security, through their training programs, through the military's training scenarios. We've reported on this over and over again. That's the context. But you can clearly see, and let's play that clip again really quick. Can you guys got that ready?
Well, the nice thing about this piece of equipment is that if somebody is directing fire toward a team that's trying to get in, they safely can pull right up to a front, take enemy fire, and still try to address a threat without being fear of getting shot.
So I'm thinking that is totally appropriate in Iraq, but what kind of a situation in the U.S. would you see that happening?
I mean, we've got a lot of constitutionalists and a lot of people that stockpile weapons, a lot of ammunition. I mean, we've got a lot of constitutionalists and a lot of people that stockpile weapons, a lot of ammunition. They have weapons here locally.
There you go. So, yeah, this is appropriate for Iraq, but what about here? And he goes, well, yeah, here we've got constitutionalists. It was never about the Islamic terrorists in Iraq. That was essentially a training program for them coming back home to America. Tyranny abroad always comes home. The founders of this country understood that. If we have a government that is no longer constrained by the Constitution but comes after constitutionalists, that's the danger, and that's what it always turns into. We have developed a militarized standing army. That's what this program is all really about, and that's clearly come home. You have any comments, Paul?
Yeah, when he says stockpiling weapons, that means owning guns. I mean, I've seen cases before where they raid somebody for stockpiling weapons, and the guy owns like 3 or 4 guns. So it's crucial to understand what they actually mean when they say that. Also, you talked about it coming out of Washington. After Ferguson, Obama came out with all this rhetoric against the militarized police state. But if you actually look at what he proposed the White House do about it, it was merely to encourage the local police departments to reform and have dialogue with civil rights leaders. So there was no teeth whatsoever in those so-called actions taken by the White House after Ferguson. They merely advised the police departments to look at their policy. So nothing's going to happen from that perspective.
And then make some proposals, which they didn't fund, to give cameras to all the police. Well, you know, we've had a lot of police departments who are wearing cameras, and somehow they managed to miss recording whenever there's a misdeed in many of these cases. But, of course, that wasn't going to change anything with the Eric Garner situation because that was recorded. And the other issue, the other answer that they had trying to make it into a racial thing was to say, well, we need to have more black police officers in communities that have a higher percentage of blacks in the police department. And yet, with Eric Garner, the entire process of him being choked to death there on the sidewalk was overseen by a female black officer who was watching that as it happened. So clearly, having more black police officers, having more cameras, that's not really going to solve anything. Let's go to Chris in Texas. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, how you doing? I'm a first-time caller. Glad to get in. I wanted to talk about I've done some research over the last, 4 or 5 years or so. Got a lot of disinformation and finally kind of connected the dots. I've seen some videos in the past, but one that really kind of explains everything in detail is a gentleman by the name of Kurt Kallenbach, I believe. And it's called Season of Treason, where he goes into detail, explains how it's under the United States corporation and they're not working for the United States for the people. It's all legal terms listed under persons, gets into your DNA, your birth certificate, and explains why Obama, you can have a president from Japan. He doesn't have to be a U.S. citizen because he's the CEO of the corporation.
Yeah, I think instead of calling it Washington, D.C., we ought to call it Washington, INC, Washington, Inc. Absolutely. When you're talking about season of treason, I mean, this is the time of year, actually, too, when they ram everything through. We get the NDAA, where they have indefinite detention of American citizens without trial. They passed that on a New Year's Eve. We say they rammed through Obamacare on a Christmas Eve. And then, of course, everything that they just did to us this last week, they pushed that through and very last minute so they could all go home. And, of course, funded it not just until the next year, but funded it for an entire year. Let's go to, thank you, Chris. Let's go to JJ in Kansas. JJ, you want to talk about Australia?
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I got two questions. The first question is in regards to the Australia deal. I haven't been following I've been hearing it, but I haven't gotten too much detail myself investigating about it. But what I have heard kind of makes me wonder if this could be like sort of a false flag, you know, with the shooter dead, which that's mainly always the case. But with the shooter dead, and then with the witness putting out in the media, I could be wrong.
Well, go ahead.
Putting out in the media, hey, this is an ISIS attack, you know, trying to draw attention to ISIS.
Let's get Paul's comment on this, because Paul said that he thought it was curious that the media narrative was essentially moving away from trying to tie it into ISIS for the time being and trying to deny that there was any connection with Islamicism or jihadis or ISIS or anything like that, that it's just the work of one lone criminal. Go ahead, Paul.
Well, what I also found interesting was, and this may be another reason why the media and the authorities are not so keen to kind of generate any story about this perpetrator that suggests political motive and that he was just mentally ill, lone nut, is the fact that he was given political asylum by the Australian government in 1996. And then in 2001, he was kind of a poster child for Australia's ABC network in demonizing Iran, because he claimed that his life was under threat from the Iranian government. That's how he got into Australia in the first place. So they kind of used him as a poster child back in 2001. Now he's very anti-Assad. So that obviously doesn't fit with their narrative right now. So that might be another reason why they're keen to distance themselves from him having political motivation, because they were closely affiliated with him, the Australian government and the media, back in 2001, when his political opinions were useful for their narrative.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it certainly looked like he was doing everything he could to say that his motivation was some kind of a Islamic jihad when he had them hold the sign up in the window. Let's go to James in South Carolina. James?
Hi, David.
Hey.
I wanted to talk about torture for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
I keep seeing the narrative and the discussion orbit around, is torture effective in gathering information, and does it prevent attacks, save lives, that kind of thing? Which I don't think torture has anything to do with that. I think torture is about provoking terror in a population.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's why you release somebody after they're tortured.
That's right.
So they will go back and they'll say to everybody, this is what they do to me. And everybody's going to say, oh, we can't mess with them. We can't stand up to them. Look what they did to Joe.
Mm-hmm.
Or
oh, absolutely. I absolutely agree. And if you look at some of the, of course, you know, some of the torture ranged from attacking people's dignity to outright killing them and everything in between. But I think the key part of that is, even at the bottom end of the spectrum, to humiliate people, to, as I said before, to take away their dignity, then you take away their freedom, then you can take their lives. And I think, as you pointed out, this is about intimidating American citizens. I think it's very clear if you look at Feinstein's report. She had like 20 different key findings. Every single one of them said the CIA did this, the CIA did that, CIA didn't do this, and they should have. There was nothing there except excuses for the administration, excuses for the Senate, who should have been shutting this down, who should have had oversight, yet they put in her report that they had absolutely no responsibility to this whatsoever. It was something that the CIA did. And your conclusion has to come to the fact that, well, if the CIA can do this and pull the hood over everybody and not get punished, I guess the CIA is the real government. We'll be right back with your calls. We have Paul Joseph Watson from the UK. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, your host today, and joining us from the UK is Paul Joseph Watson, and we're going to go right back to your calls in a moment. But this article just came out on Infowars.com. Despite Australia's gun control, a gunman holds hostages for 16 hours. You get that? One of the most rigid gun control regimes on the planet, and yet this guy, who had 22 counts of aggravated sexual assault previously, 14 counts of aggravated indecent assault previously, related to 6 different women. This guy is able to get a gun, and he's able to hold these hostages for 16 hours, 2 of them dying. Paul, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I made a series of tweets about that, and there were several incidents, I believe, back in the late 80s, early 90s, which the authorities exploited to ban all guns in Australia. Of course, their violent crime went rate went up.
Yes.
And now, you know, my thought was, if this happened in Texas, would it have gone on for 16 hours? Would not one of the store owners have had access to some kind of gun? So it's definitely an issue. It's one that liberals get enraged about when you even mention it, but it's definitely a factor.
And it's interesting because this guy has had all these instances before attacking women and this sort of thing. One of them, one woman was stabbed to death and set on fire. They say in 2002 he faced charges in a plot to murder his first wife in Sydney, and she was stabbed to death. She wasn't shot. And yet this guy who has all of these, this long rap sheet, he's not having any problem getting a gun in Australia. That should tell us something about gun control, as well as the fact that he's totally in charge for 16 hours. Let's go back, take a couple of quick calls. Let's try to get everybody off here before the end of the show. Let's go to Patton in FEMA Region 4. Patton, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, David. How many more acts of treason, murder, theft, fraud, and rape by Barry Soetoro, a.k.a. Barry Obama, a.k.a. closet communist Barack Obama, must we endure before we arrest him? Find a way, something?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the bottom line is, as we pointed out, clearly the GOP leadership doesn't have a problem with what he's doing either. I mean, it isn't just that you're going to get rid of Obama and then have him be replaced by Joe Biden. Even if we replace him with the Republicans, we're going to get more of the same. Your comments, Paul?
Well, the Republicans are not going to impeach him. I mean, that's a fact now. They're going to wait. We're probably going to see Hillary Clinton run against the Republican, if not Elizabeth Warren, which is just another brand of the same poison. So they're going to be quite accepting to the fact that Hillary's come in, and then instead of race, they're going to use gender to divide the country once more. So we could be in for another 4 years of that.
Yeah, they not only did not impeach him, but they basically endorsed his policies in this last budget. Couple of weeks after they were elected to undo specific things, they go back and endorse those. So they don't have a problem with his criminal activities. They want that power when they get in charge. And so the question remains, you know, what do we do about it? I clearly don't have an answer. It's a very frustrating situation, but we still need to pay attention as to what's going on. And we need to, I think, a key part of this is more people need to be informed and involved about this. It's an educational issue. I think we need a broader base before we're going to see any kind of solution come up. Especially a peaceful solution, which is what we want to see.
The globalist social engineers are not just targeting us with propaganda. They are manipulating our genetics. We are being targeted at every level by estrogen mimickers that lower our testosterone and other hormones and natural compounds that the body needs. After consulting top doctors, nutritionists, pharmacists, and others, we have developed what I believe is the ultimate non-GMO organic super male vitality formula sourced from powerful organic herbs and then concentrated for maximum potency. Super Male Vitality was developed to activate your body's own natural processes instead of using synthetic chemicals. Super Male Vitality by InfoWars Life is so powerful that I only take half the recommended dose. For a limited time, we are offering 15% off Super Male Vitality at InfoWarsLife.com to introduce you to this powerful supplement. Visit InfoWarsLife.com today to secure your Super Male Vitality. InfoWarsLife.com.
We also had the story that broke last Friday that we talked about through the weekend about the Spokane, Washington officer, the sheriff's deputy, who was talking about his MRAP and how when questioned why he needed this kind of capability, he said, well, we have all these constitutionalists in the area. Daryl in Kansas says that he called the Spokane, Washington Police Department. Daryl, what did they tell you?
I'm looking at their website right now, and it says they're hiring. Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, it says they're hiring. I'm looking at their website. Yes, I did call, and the woman thought it was very laughable. I wish I would have recorded it to put it on the internet, but I asked her, why is that guy not like constitutionalist? Didn't he take an oath to uphold the Constitution? And she's all, I don't know what oath they take. I haven't been to any of the ceremonies. And
yeah, really.
She was very much like I was bothering and laughed. And I'd like to say you do a great job, Paul, Joseph Watson, love them. You guys.
Thank you. Well, you know, that's just it. They don't really pay any attention to what they pledge to. They don't pay any attention to the Constitution. They don't take it seriously enough to really look at what they're pledging to. But, of course, we have to take it seriously, and we have to understand that anything that the government does that is not Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight on this Monday, December 15th, 2014. We're going to be joining Paul Joseph Watson in the UK, or rather he's going to be joining us. We're going to talk about what's going on in Sydney. We're now starting to get a little bit of information. I was just told that they're now saying that 2 hostages have died, as well as the man who had taken them hostage. How is that going to be used? What is that going to mean for Australia, for all of us? Is that going to be an example to take us to war in the Middle East so that we can shut down ISIS? Yet we see that this guy has no connections to ISIS or al-Nusra. Nevertheless, our former CIA Director Morrill says that the terrorist attack in the U.S. is guaranteed. He says ISIS has had a focus on Australia for some time, so by innuendo, they can make this connection. They can try to drive us to war. So we're going to talk to Paul Joseph Watson as to what's behind this and, of course, what's ahead of us in terms of this attack. How is it going to be used? Right now in this segment, though, I wanted to take your calls. I wanted to go to Daryl in Kansas, who next Monday only, and you have another 2 days to order it to get it guaranteed Christmas delivery. That's at InfoWarsLife.com, Survival Shield X2, the next level of Survival Shield with a powerful 650 micrograms of iodine per single drop. Now, going to Paul, Paul, before we start talking about Sydney, I just wanted to let you know and get your comments on it. We've had an update to this story out of Washington, Spokane, where Mikhail is putting an update on his story. He actually did finally get a comment from the police department there, and they said they thought that for us to put this up and say that this officer had a problem with constitutionalists was a cheap shot that was taken out of context. So I would invite people to take a look at that video and see if you think it's out of context. The context was the lady asked this sheriff's deputy, after he was bragging about the capabilities of his new MRAP, why would you need that? And he goes into detail talking about how, well, we need it because of constitutionalists and these people who have a lot of ammunition. I don't see that that's taken out of context. I don't think that's a cheap shot. I think the cheap shot is coming out of Homeland Security and the FBI, demonizing anybody that might be political opposition to an authoritarian police state. Paul, what's your comment?
And I've only been gone for about 5 years, and I'm really shocked that the police department has gone downhill so terribly in this sort of time, because the cops seriously weren't like that, 5, 10 years ago.
Oh, absolutely. We've seen a massive and rapid change, and where do you think that's coming from? That's coming from Washington. It's the way they're being trained. Just recently, as we're talking about what was going on in New Mexico, there was a fellow teaching at the police academy, the state police academy, and he says, I refuse to teach this shoot first curriculum. He's somebody who'd been teaching at the police academy for a long time. It's different. They're setting up different rules for the police, and we need to be very concerned about that. Stay with us. We're going to be right back with Paul Joseph Watson from the UK to talk about what happened in Sydney. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight on this Monday, December 15th, 2014. We're going to be going to Paul Joseph Watson in the UK. He's going to update us on the situation in Sydney, what's behind it, how they're going to use it. Before we go to him, though, I want to let you know this is the first time we've ever had a sale for X2, Survival Shield X2. It's our first sale. It's a big one, 17% off and free shipping. With shipping, you would have normally paid up to $38 a bottle. Now you can get it for just $24.99. This is a sale that's going to run through in alignment with the Constitution is not legitimate, because that is the supreme law of the land. That is the king. These guys are merely stewards put in place to serve that higher principle, that law that is king. That was a principle that they established during the American Revolution. They said lex rex. In other words, the law is king. And if they don't understand that, and they don't. That is the heart of all of our issues. And I would broaden it out a little bit to this as well. I think the fundamental problem with so many Christians who don't understand Romans 13 is the same thing. They don't understand that when the government is not aligned under the principles of God, then that government is no longer legitimate. In the same way that when the police or various other aspects of the government are not aligned under the Constitution, they are no longer legitimate. That's the fundamental issue here. They're not operating as a legitimate government when they deny the ultimate authority that they have for governing. That's why they take an oath to the Constitution. Thank you so much, Daryl. Let's go to Michael in South Carolina. Michael?
Hi, David.
Oh, yes. I guess it's Michelle then, right? Huh?
Okay,
Go ahead.
I had my earplug in.
Go ahead.
My first real quick comment was I was born and raised in